Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Rising Fridays. We've got another great show in store for everyone today. Ryan, you're apparently still in Vermont. How's everything up there?
Well, not only is the weather lovely up here, but a Bernie-backed state senator from the area that I'm in won the House race this last Tuesday. So you're going to have a Southern Vermonter, a Brattleboro resident, headed to join the squad in Washington D.C. Unless actually they get beaten by the Republican. We can talk about this later. But a super left-wing guy ran as an anti-war candidate in the Republican primary and said, just to be clear, I am not a Republican, but I'm running in the Republican primary, and he won the primary. There was some hilarious number of votes. I think 20,000 people came out to vote in the Republican primary here in Vermont for House, but he won it. So this means the kind of squad-aligned candidate will be the most right-wing one in the general election here in Vermont, which I'm looking forward to.
That's Vermont for you. That sounds exactly like you'd expect of an election in 2022 Vermont.
And as Becca Ballant, we had her on the show a couple months ago, if you remember. Nice case of kind of left-wing consolidation where her opponent dropped out so that it was just her against a corporate-backed Democratic candidate, and Bernie came through. So
it's an easy choice for Vermonters.
It's you would think, although the corporate candidate had the backing of Pat, it wasn't even close, and she's a lieutenant governor that got destroyed in the primary.
It's interesting, and I think another part of a larger plot that we talk about a lot, which is the sort of realigning of different interests that go on. And she's such an interesting candidate. If folks haven't seen that interview, they can go look it up on the channel. It is a really interesting one. And speaking of that, this is kind of part of something we're about to talk about when you think of all of the Republicans in general who have come out against the FBI after probably years and years of reflexive trust of the intelligence community and the FBI. And we're going to get into right now breaking down the last several days of news about the FBI's raid on Mar-a-Lago. So according to the Washington Post, this is a report from last night. Classified documents relating to nuclear weapons were among the list of items being sought after, in the FBI's search. Attorney General Merrick Garland now wants to make the search warrant public. Donald Trump said last night he welcomes that as well. Here's some of what Garland said yesterday in his address to the public.
Since I became Attorney General, I have made clear that the Department of Justice will speak through its court filings and its work. Just now, the Justice Department has filed a motion in the Southern District of Florida to unseal a search warrant and property receipt relating to a court-approved search that the FBI conducted earlier this week. That search was of premises located in Florida belonging to the former president.
Well, there you go. Emily, so has your thinking evolved on the kind of either the legality or the justification of this raid since it has come out? Where are you at now?
Well, I'm reflexively distrustful of the FBI in this era. And so while it's entirely possible that Donald Trump violated the Presidential Records Act, I think this battle of anonymous sources that we're locked in once again, it feels like we're in the heat of the Russia collusion narrative one more time. I feel like I'm back in 2017, and you have these warring anonymous intelligence community leaks in the New York Times and the Washington Post that could mean something absolutely massive, and they're teased that way, or they could be wildly, intentionally vague when you're talking about nuclear documents. It could be anything that mentions nuclear weapons, according to the Washington Post reporting. It could be something extremely important, or it could be absolutely nothing. And I'm not inclined to trust anonymous sources shopping their intelligence around with nothing other than their name to the reporter to go off of, and they won't even be public about who they are. So I'm not inclined to take that especially seriously. I don't think it's a good decision to jump to conclusions on either side, but I think it's probably a pretty good position at this point to be reflexively skeptical of the politicized FBI as it is right now, and that's totally where I stand on this. I'm probably too young to be in a place where I could even be hypocritical. I was too young during the Bush years and even some of the Obama years to have a strong stance on the intelligence community. I was mostly in college, so I don't know where I would have landed in those years. I think hopefully I probably would have been on the sort of Rand Paul side of that conversation. But what do you think, Ryan, after all of this? Does the FBI deserve the benefit of the doubt here when we still don't really know clearly what was going on?
I don't think they deserve the benefit of the doubt, but at the same time, we don't want to necessarily, as pundits, kind of embarrass ourselves by making pronouncements. Like you said, it really does depend what was in there. If it's just a letter, from, let's say, Kim Jong-un to Trump, and he's taking the letter with him, the kind of thing that a president would do to write his memoirs, although the idea of Donald Trump sitting down and writing a memoir is kind of funny. Although if he dictated one, I would definitely read it, or maybe we could have Robbie read it in his Trump voice out loud to us. But if it's a letter from Kim Jong-un that mentions nuclear weapons, that's not very impressive, and then it wouldn't feel justified. If there are actual genuine nuclear secrets in there, particularly given his relationship with the Saudis and others, then you're like, okay, now this is serious. But we don't know, and we also know that the FBI and the Department of Justice generally kind of pattern as it relates to defendants is to treat them in general kind of with contempt and with arrogance. That's just generally how prosecutors across the board treat defendants. And George Will, of all people, actually made an interesting point in a recent column where he said, Merrick Garland has said that he doesn't have a political bone in his body. He might be right, and that might be a big problem. When you are investigating or prosecuting a former president, you can't pretend that politics are not coming into play. And so you have to take into account the politics and the optics of a situation. And so while it might be okay kind of to raid a normal defendant over failing to turn over some minor, let's say, classified documents that they took from their time in the White House, if they're a White House staff or something. If this is a former president of the United States, you have to weigh the politics of it also. And you have to say, what is the level of these documents? Now Trump has responded, as you would expect Trump to respond, with a bunch of whataboutism on Truth Social. What did he say? He said, I continue to ask, what happened to the 33 million pages of documents taken to Chicago by President Obama? The fake news media refuses to talk about that. They want it canceled. I don't quite get his use of the word canceled there, but A for effort, I guess. New York Times Maggie Haberman tweeted, there was said to have been a subpoena that preceded the June meeting with Trump lawyers and the head of a counterintelligence unit, suggesting there were efforts to get the documents prior to the search of Trump's home. And Rudy Giuliani has weighed in, saying that there'll be fire and brimstone if Trump wins in 2024 in retribution for this.
Right. And again, the whataboutism thing is interesting because I don't necessarily agree that it's whataboutism, because I think he's trying to make a point about the politics of it, exactly as you were just saying, Ryan, that this is something the FBI, like the precedent for somebody violating the Presidential Records Act it doesn't look like what we suspect happened or what it appears to have happened this week at Mar-a-Lago. And that's not to say, again, I absolutely don't think that Donald Trump would, it's completely plausible to me that Donald Trump would have taken information before technically declassifying it, as presidents can do. That's entirely plausible to me. I don't doubt it. I'm sure that other presidents have done it, and I would have no problem believing that he did that as well. But whether or not you actually go in and raid a former president's home is a different question. And the politicization of the FBI, after you have Peter Strzok and you have Lisa Page and you have all of this uncovered information where we found out that the anti-Trump sentiments, it's not partisan, right? Like, it's not partisan anti-Republican. It is specifically what we've seen from the FBI, anti-Trump. The dossier, I mean, we could get into all of this. It was all specifically aimed at Donald Trump and finding a way. I'm curious if you see this too, because from my perspective, it's always been about finding a way to disqualify him. So like during the primary, this guy has to have something in his background that can disqualify him from being president. He has to have something that can disqualify him from running for president again. It's this noble quest they're on to disqualify Donald Trump from president of the United States because they, unelected people, think they know better than voters. And again, it seems to me like we're on another fishing expedition where they think they know better and they think they can find that one scrap of evidence that's going to make it so you can have, Ron DeSantis run against Joe Biden, or you can have some sort of John Kasich moment against Joe Biden, whatever it is, but anybody but Donald Trump. And finally, they will rid America, the scourge of Donald Trump. They think that they can do that. And to me, this seems like it's likely another part of that. I don't know. What do you think, Ryan?
Well, it's interesting how I think the left and right can look at this same thing and see completely different things in the FBI. Like where you see kind of people who are on a noble crusade, or what they consider to be a noble crusade, kind of an out of control, reckless pursuit of the president. I actually see complete fecklessness and cowardice on the part of the FBI. That if the FBI was serious, the January 6th committee has laid out all sorts of breadcrumbs that would get them to a prosecution of a crime of trying to overthrow the election. Like that to me is what a courageous, a law enforcement body would do. Say, look, you tried to coup our government, you failed. We're going to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Instead, they're going after potentially some ticky-tack paperwork stuff. If there are major classified documents in there that we learn about, then that changes the question. But it certainly appears that there could be an irony here that, if they went kind of quote unquote by the book and just launched a raid based on a National Records Act violation, they're going to end up looking more political, and it's going to backfire on them than if they had actually done the more difficult thing, which is just lay their cards on the table and say, Donald Trump tried to overturn an election illegally. We're going to make a case in front of a jury that he tried to do that. But let's go back to the FBI again. So we have a mashup here that viewer of ours, Halal Flow, at Halal Flow on Twitter, made for us of basically Republicans and Fox News and other conservative media insisting that, well, we don't necessarily need to wait to see what the FBI produces, because whatever the FBI produced is probably fake and was planted. So let's see if we can roll that.
I'm concerned that they may have planted something. At this point, who knows? I don't trust the government. And that's a very frightening thing as an American. If I didn't want to be an American and go to another, this is third world stuff. We've heard it. This is Cuba. This is not our country.
A tyrannical, anti-conservative, anti-Republican, constant violation of the law, which is what the January 6th committee is. You have a fake committee being covered by the fake news with a fake FBI, which, by the way, you'll notice they didn't allow anybody on the Trump side into Mar-a-Lago. So we have no idea whether or not they planted evidence.
Yes, that's exactly right. And Newt, I have a couple thoughts. Number one, I wish I trusted our law enforcement. You need some form of law enforcement to have a civil society. But I'm right with you. I say, they're planting evidence. How disappointing of a place we are in our country, where our immediate reaction is that our own law enforcement agency might be planning evidence against a former president.
How horrible is that? They could have easily negotiated the return of documents like that without guns and warrants. What the FBI is probably doing is planning evidence, which is what they did during the Russia hoax. We also have a hunch they doctored evidence to get the warrant.
And his lawyers said they brought in backpacks. What was in those backpacks? Did they bring those in to fill them up, or did they have something in there?
I don't understand why people aren't lighting their hair on fire. I don't understand why people aren't out in the streets. This isn't like, oh, well, you know, let's just see what's in the warrant. I mean, they've been doing this. This is the third election. This is the third election. We know they doctor evidence. We know they plant evidence.
You know, there's an interesting point to be made about how they lack zero credibility after the dossier situation that it leads to this. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about this in my radar, but it's interesting, Ryan, because to your point, it seems to me like that came out on the transom in sort of Trump world, this idea, this possibility that something was planted. And I'm putting nothing past the FBI at this point, although I have no evidence to suggest they planted anything, certainly, and time will tell. But it seems like that's a talking point that was sort of put out for folks to pick up on, and they did. And it's interesting hearing it come from a former Trump attorney on Fox News. It seems like Trump world kind of got the memo on that. And in Trump's statement last night, saying he welcomes the warrant, the release of the warrant, he says even though it was written by people who have this like strong anti-Trump idea, and to me again, we might learn more about this by the time this video goes to air. We might learn more about this today, but it sounds to me like he's trying to prime people for something that does indeed look very bad, and whether it actually is bad is a different question. But it does seem to me like he's prepping that. And one more point on January 6th, Ryan, because to your point about fecklessness in the FBI, Andy McCarthy and I think Jonathan Turley both had columns this week where they talked about the probability or the possibility that this entire raid was about January 6th, that the Presidential Records Act was the way they could get a warrant. And in the same way cops will get a warrant to search a house for paraphernalia, knowing that there will be evidence of a bigger crime, this was something to sort of snatch up some documents that could be evidence of something that they could charge Donald Trump with related to January 6th. And so to me, it still seems that it's possible that actually what they're doing is not feckless. It's indeed sort of dishonest, and dishonest at best. I'll leave it at that.
Right. We'll see. We'll see if this was a pretext, for some type of search that actually involved January 6th and whether they can produce something around that or not. One thing that did make me start to question my kind of baseline lack of trust in the FBI and wonder, actually, did they get something pretty explosive in these boxes? What is actually this talking point that's coming from Trump world? If Trump world knows that there's nothing but like schedules and lunch menus in these boxes, then they wouldn't actually be out there saying that the FBI planted something. Because come on, that's silly. Like the FBI. With regard to Trump, there's plenty to criticize them, but they're not going to plant evidence. And Jesse Waters going on and on and on about planting evidence is just that's a reference to his complete and utter misunderstanding of an earlier kind of unsealed search warrant from the what was the guy's name,
Christopher Steele.
Not Christopher Steele, this Durham from John Durham.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
He completely misread this filing from Durham, went out and said, look, they planted evidence on these servers and then fed it to the FBI. And Durham had to do a separate filing saying it's not our fault if the media misunderstood what we had said. So that's what that's in reference to. So that's what gives me some sense that maybe there actually is something big in here, and that the Trump administration is trying to prepare people for it. That when it does emerge, like this is what was in here, they're like, it wasn't in there. They actually planted there. But it is wild that finally you're seeing conservatives come around to some idea that the FBI can't necessarily be trusted. They weren't there, when the FBI was going through its McCarthyist, rounding up of communists. They weren't there when it was doing COINTELPRO. They weren't there when it was assassinating Fred Hampton or trying to pressure Martin Luther King into committing suicide. There's all things that we have known for decades at this point. They weren't there, when they were, setting up mentally ill Islamic people as terrorists by kind of, begging them to just please say yes to being involved in some conspiracy and then holding some big press conference that they had foiled some major terrorist attack. Like there has been evidence that the FBI cannot be trusted at first blush since the beginning of the FBI. It is interesting that all of a sudden, they're be planting evidence. You think that they could plant evidence? And for generations, you've been the most vocal supporters of this institution that you now are telling us you're convinced is planting evidence on the President of the United States? Well, that kind of calls into question your previous judgment and your current judgment.
I think it's a statement on the dissolution of neoconservative control of the Republican Party, honestly, that people feel comfortable really looking at this as it is. And in the same way, I would say a lot of the left, where were you on all of these cultural issues? Now you're upset about it and welcome. It can only be a good thing, Ryan, that there are more, I think, people in the country, whether they're conservative, independent, or liberal, who look at these institutions with the lack of credibility that they have duly earned. This entirely appropriate lack of credibility where they belong, because that's really the only way that there's an appetite for things to get fixed, frankly.
And I know you've got another angle on this. Looking forward to that coming up in your radar in just a minute. Stick around, everybody, for that.